He did not call them to boast of his wealth or power, but to listen. He asked about their hopes, their struggles, and how he could help. The staff were hesitant at first, unused to this side of the sheik, but slowly, one by one, they spoke. They shared dreams of education, family needs, and community projects they wished to pursue. He listened, taking notes, asking questions, and promising to support them. It was a moment of humility he had never known, and it left him with a quiet joy that was stronger than any luxury he had ever possessed. Encouraged by the caregiver, he began thinking beyond the palace walls. He started exploring projects in nearby towns and villages, places he had once overlooked or ignored. He wanted to use his resources not to show off, but to create opportunities to bring hope, and to make life easier for those who had less. He visited schools, funded clean water projects, and helped repair homes. The gratitude and smiles he received in return stirred something deep inside him. He realized that life was not about hoarding wealth, but about sharing it in ways that mattered. The sheik also began reconnecting with his family. In the past, pride and anger had kept him distant. Now, with a clearer understanding of life's fragility, he reached out. He called his siblings, cousins, and distant relatives. At first, conversations were awkward, filled with long silences and cautious words. But gradually, laughter returned, stories were shared, and bonds began to mend. It was not perfect, and it would take time. But he felt the warmth of family again, a feeling he had thought lost forever, at the same time. He grew closer to the caregiver, though not in a way that felt dependent. She was no longer just a helper. She was a companion who had guided him through the darkness. They spent hours talking about life, philosophy, and human nature. She encouraged him to reflect on his mistakes without guilt and to see them as lessons. Through her guidance, he learned that growth often comes from struggle, and that strength is not measured by wealth or power, but by resilience, compassion, and the ability to care for others. One day, the sheik decided to host a small gathering in the palace, inviting villagers, staff, and a few business partners he trusted. It was not a lavish event, but a celebration of community, connection, and hope. People who had never met each other before shared stories, laughter, and ideas. He watched quietly, noticing the joy on their faces, the sense of belonging that money could never buy. For the first time in decades, he felt fully alive in the presence of others. He also began mentoring young people from the towns he visited. He shared his knowledge of business, life, and responsibility. But more importantly, he taught them about integrity, kindness, and the value of human connection. The sheik realized that true influence comes not from fear or authority, but from the ability to inspire and uplift. Watching young people grow and dream, he felt a purpose he had never experienced before, reason to rise each morning and continue striving to do good. In the quiet moments of reflection, he thought about the journey he had taken. Just months ago, he had been a man trapped in despair, surrounded by wealth but empty inside. Now, he felt alive, connected, and full of hope. He understood that wealth alone could not create happiness. It was the relationships he nurtured, the lives he touched, and the choices he made that mattered most. The caregiver had shown him this truth, not through lectures or commands, but through consistent care, patience. An example, the sheik also took steps to repair his businesses in a way that benefited more than just himself. He invested in ethical projects, created opportunities for employees, and funded initiatives that helped local communities. He realized that influence could be used for positive change, and that true legacy is built not on luxury, but on the good one does for others. He felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known, a satisfaction deeper than any treasure in his palace. As he continued this journey, he noticed changes in himself that went beyond actions. He laughed more freely, smiled without hesitation, and felt gratitude in moments both small and large. He was no longer burdened by loneliness or despair. Instead, he felt a connection to the world around him. The sheik began keeping a journal again, recording thoughts, reflections, and observations. Writing became a way to process feelings, set intentions, and recognize growth. Each entry reminded him of how far he had come and how much life still had to offer. One afternoon, he and the caregiver walked through the palace gardens, now filled with flowers they had planted together. Birds chirped, sunlight danced on the leaves, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. He stopped to watch a butterfly land delicately on a flower. "Life feels different now," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I can see the value in things I used to ignore. I can feel joy without needing to possess it." She smiled, not saying anything. Letting him speak and feel the truth he had discovered, the sheik also began to reflect on the past, not with regret or bitterness, but with understanding. He realized that every mistake, every failure, and every moment of despair had shaped him into the person he was now, a man capable of empathy, compassion, and meaningful action. He no longer sought to erase the past, but to learn from it, using it as a guide for future choices. This perspective allowed him to move forward with confidence and grace. Unburdened by the mistakes he once carried like heavy chains at night, he often walked alone through the palace halls, thinking about the people he had met, the families he had helped, and the communities he had touched. He felt a sense of responsibility, not as a ruler or wealthy man, but as a human being with the ability to impact lives. This awareness filled him with purpose, and he realized that life had meaning, not in wealth or power, but in action, care, and love. The caregiver remained a steady presence through it all. She did not seek recognition, praise, or reward. She simply continued to guide, support, and encourage. Her influence was subtle, but profound, helping the sheik rediscover his heart, his values, and his purpose. Through her, he learned that change is not sudden, but gradual. That healing takes time, and that hope, once nurtured, can grow into something enduring and life-giving. Over the weeks and months, the sheik became known in nearby communities not just as a wealthy man, but as someone who genuinely cared. He was invited to meetings, celebrations, and projects not for his title, but for his willingness to listen, help, and act. People saw him differently, and he saw himself differently. No longer a man defined by despair and wealth, he was a man defined by purpose, connection, and the positive impact he could make. One day, while visiting a school he had helped renovate, he spoke to the children about dreams, hard work, and kindness. They listened with wide eyes, inspired not just by his story, but by the genuine interest he showed in their lives. He realized that influence is most powerful when it nurtures, guides, and uplifts. This understanding became central to his new way of living a life focused not on self, but on others, on growth, and on meaningful connections. Even in the quiet moments, he felt the difference within himself. Sitting in his study, looking out over the gardens, he reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. The despair that had once consumed him had lifted, replaced by hope, purpose, and a sense of belonging. He had learned that happiness is not a possession, but a state of being, nurtured by connection, action, and gratitude. By the end of this period, the sheik had transformed almost entirely. He was no longer the isolated man trapped in a palace of gold. He was a man alive in the world, connected to people, communities, and his own heart. He had purpose, joy, and a reason to live beyond himself. The caregiver had guided him to this point, but the change was his own. He had chosen to embrace life, to engage with it fully, and to find meaning in every small, beautiful moment. And as he stood in the palace garden one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he understood the truth he had been searching for all along. Wealth could buy comfort, but only connection could bring joy. Power could command respect, but only kindness could create legacy. And life, in its simplest and most profound form, is worth living when one opens the heart, touches others, and embraces the journey. However imperfect it may be, the sheik had changed in ways he could hardly believe. The emptiness that had once consumed him seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a quiet strength and a deep sense of purpose. He moved through his palace with a new awareness. Noticing the life around him, the laughter of staff, the voices of neighbors, the gentle rustling of the gardens outside, for the first time in decades, he felt a true connection to the world. a sense of being alive in both body and spirit. He had learned that life was no longer about wealth, power, or appearances. It was about presence, kindness, and the small moments that carried the most meaning. Each act of giving, each moment of listening, each effort to understand and help others had filled his heart in ways that gold could never have done. He had discovered a truth that many never understand. Happiness is not something to be bought. It is something to be created, nurtured, and shared. One morning, as the sun rose over the desert, the sheik found himself walking through a nearby village he had helped develop. Children ran past him, laughing freely, their energy infectious. Villagers greeted him warmly, not out of fear or respect for his title. He was a man who had everything the world could offer. Towering buildings in his name, a fleet of luxury cars, private jets, and enough money to live several lifetimes without worrying about a single thing. Yet, as he sat alone in his vast palace, surrounded by golden chandeliers and silk carpets, he felt a hollow emptiness inside. The sheik, as everyone called him, had spent decades building an empire, earning respect and admiration, but none of it mattered now. None of it could fill the silence that had grown inside him. Each day had started to feel the same. A long stretch of meaningless hours filled with luxury that only reminded him of how lonely he had become. He would wake in a room so big it could fit a small city, yet he felt trapped. The walls adorned with priceless art and treasures from across the world only reflected back the emptiness he carried inside. The sheik used to believe that wealth brought happiness, but now he knew better. All the riches, all the grand feasts and sparkling parties, it could not heal the pain that had settled deep in his heart. He remembered the days when he was younger, when ambition and energy drove him. Those early mornings in the desert, planning business deals, negotiating with foreign investors, and expanding his kingdom, had felt exciting. Life had a rhythm then, a purpose. But over the years, the rhythm had faded. The thrill of deals and wealth had dulled into a monotonous routine. The sheik had lost friends, trusted advisors had betrayed him, and loved ones had drifted away. Those who once celebrated his successes were now gone, leaving him with an empty palace and a heart heavier than gold. One particular evening, the sheik sat by the massive window in his penthouse, staring at the city below, lit like a river of diamonds. The lights sparkled, the cars glided along the streets, and the people moved with purpose, unaware of the lonely man watching from above. He thought about how strange it was that he had all this, and yet he was more alone than ever. His mind wandered to memories he tried to forget, the laughter of family he no longer saw, the warmth of love that had faded, the promises broken by time and circumstance. It all weighed on him like a storm cloud that never moved, never released its rain. Even his health had begun to falter. The doctors had warned him about stress, fatigue, and the effects of living a life without real connections. But warnings were just words on paper to him now. He had the finest doctors, the best treatments, yet nothing could cure the emptiness in his soul. At night, he would lie awake in a bed so large it swallowed him whole, staring at the ceiling, thinking of a life that felt meaningless despite all his accomplishments. He wondered if he had ever truly lived, or if he had only existed. Chasing shadows of happiness that were never real, the world knew him as a sheik, a man of power, wealth, and influence. People admired him, envied him, and often approached him with respect, flattery, or demands. But behind closed doors, he was a man who had lost hope. The sheik had once believed in control and the power of making everything perfect. But life had shown him its cruelty. Betrayals, losses, and the harsh realities of human nature had chipped away at his spirit until he barely recognized himself in the mirror. He looked at his reflection one morning, trying to find the man he once was. All he saw was a stranger with tired eyes and a heart full of regret. One day, a series of letters arrived. They were reminders of the life he had lost, the family he could not reach, the business partners who had betrayed him, the friends who had disappeared over the years. Each letter felt like a punch to his chest. He realized that no amount of wealth could bring back the past or heal the wounds that had been left behind. It was a truth he could not ignore any longer. He had everything the world could give, yet he felt like he had nothing at all. The sheik, who had once dreamed of greatness, now dreamed only of peace, even if it meant surrendering to the void he felt inside, despite the despair. There were moments, brief flashes, when he remembered the joy of life. A child laughing in the street, a simple sunset over the desert, the smell of rain on dry earth. These small things reminded him that life still existed outside the walls of his palace. But the sadness always returned, heavier than before, dragging him back into isolation. He wanted to feel alive again, but the world seemed distant, foreign, and unreachable. The sheik longed for something, or someone, to remind him that life had meaning, but he did not know where to find it. In the midst of all this, the sheik's staff noticed the change. The men and women who had worked for him for years saw the spark in his eyes dim. The laughter vanished from his lips, and the energy fade from his steps. They whispered among themselves, wondering if the great sheik, the man who had conquered so much in life, had lost the will to continue. They tried to cheer him, to offer advice or companionship, but he pushed them away. He had built walls too high for anyone to climb. Hiding his pain behind a mask of pride and indifference, even the grand feasts and celebrations he once adored felt hollow. He would sit at the head of a long, golden table, surrounded by luxury and extravagance, yet hear only the echo of silence in his heart. Guests praised him, toasting to his wealth and achievements, but he could not join in their joy. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all reminded him of what he had lost and could never regain. For the first time in his life, he realized that power and money could not fill the soul's deepest need: connection, love, and purpose. He remembered the nights when he had dreamed of ruling with wisdom and kindness. He wanted to create something that mattered, to leave a legacy beyond wealth. But life had a way of teaching harsh lessons. Decisions made in haste, trust given to the wrong people, and choices driven by ambition rather than heart had left him isolated. Now, sitting alone, he could only reflect on mistakes and missed opportunities. The sheik had everything, but he had lost himself somewhere along the way. There were times when he wondered if anyone could understand him. Could anyone see beyond the riches, the title, the grandeur? Could anyone recognize the loneliness, the pain, and the despair he carried? He felt invisible despite being known by millions. It was a strange and bitter truth that a man could be admired by the world, yet feel utterly unseen. The sheik wanted someone who would see him for who he really was, not what he owned, or the title he held. But he had no idea where to find such a person, or if such a person even existed, in the quiet of his palace. He began to make small changes without realizing it. He walked slower, gazed longer at the horizon, and tried to remember the moments when life had felt real. The sound of birds outside his window, the wind against the desert sand, the distant laughter of children, these small natural things began to stir something faint within him. A tiny flicker of life, almost imperceptible, began to grow, though he did not yet understand its meaning. The sheik's mind wandered to the future, or rather to the lack of it. He could see the path ahead, and it terrified him. Wealth and power offered no comfort in the face of emptiness. He could continue to live in this palace, surrounded by treasures, yet remain a prisoner of his own despair. He could continue to follow the routines of luxury, but they were hollow rituals that offered no satisfaction. The sheik realized that if he wanted to find hope, it would not come from money or status. It would have to come from something far deeper, something human. And yet, despite the darkness, there was a part of him that resisted. Deep inside, beneath the fatigue and sorrow, a quiet voice whispered that life was not over, that meaning could be found, that hope might still exist. But he could not see how it would happen. He could not imagine a reason to rise each day, a reason to smile, a reason to care. He had everything the world could offer, yet he lacked the one thing that mattered most, a purpose that could heal his heart. The sheik had reached the edge of despair, standing at the crossroads of life. On one side lay the emptiness he had known for years, a path of isolation and pain. On the other side was a future he could not yet see, one that might bring hope, connection, and healing. He did not know who or what could guide him forward. he did not know that soon. Someone would enter his life, a person whose kindness and compassion would challenge everything he believed, and slowly begin to pull him back from the brink. For now, he remained in his palace, surrounded by luxury, power, and silence. The Sheik, the man the world admired, the man who had built an empire, felt powerless against the emptiness that had taken hold. And yet somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the pain, a small, fragile hope waited, unseen and unacknowledged, ready to awaken when the right moment arrived. Life in the palace continued in its quiet, endless routine. The Sheik moved from room to room, surrounded by gold, silk, and treasures, but none of it seemed real anymore. Each day blurred into the next, a monotonous rhythm of emptiness. His mind often wandered to memories he could not escape, and at times he wondered if life had anything left to offer him. It was during one of these silent, lonely mornings that a new presence arrived at the palace. She was a caregiver, sent by his closest advisors, though he had not asked for one. At first he felt annoyed at the idea. The thought of a stranger watching him, trying to manage his life, irritated him. He had spent so many years controlling every detail, and now the idea of letting someone in felt impossible. But she was determined, calm, and patient in a way that immediately caught attention, not because she demanded it, but because she gave it willingly. The first day she arrived, she did nothing extraordinary. She did not rush in with a smile or loud words. Instead, she observed quietly, learning the rhythm of the palace, noting the Sheik's habits, the hours he slept, and the way he moved through the rooms. When she finally spoke to him, her voice was gentle but clear. She did not flatter him, nor did she fawn over his wealth. Instead, she asked simple questions, the kind that were easy to answer but hard to ignore. "Would you like tea?" she asked softly. "Would you like to see the garden today?" The Sheik, who had grown used to people who either feared him or wanted something from him, reacted with suspicion. He answered with short, clipped words, expecting her to give up. But she did not. She waited patiently, not offended, not frustrated, not desperate. Her calm presence was a quiet challenge to his bitterness. It was the first time in years that someone had approached him without expectation, without judgment, without wanting something in return. Over the next few days, she began small routines with him. She would remind him to eat, help him take short walks around the palace, and even read to him from books he had long forgotten he owned. The Sheik resisted at first, silent and distant, watching her with eyes that held years of pain. But there was something about her presence that slowly began to pull at him. A thread of human connection he had not felt in so long that he almost forgot it existed. One afternoon, as the sun spilled golden light across the marble floors, she suggested they sit in the palace garden. The Sheik hesitated, unused to such normality, unused to simplicity. But something in her tone, neither commanding nor pleading, made him follow. The garden was a quiet sanctuary, filled with plants from distant lands and flowers that bloomed in colors he could not name. Birds flitted from branch to branch, and a soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine and earth. For the first time in years, he noticed the beauty of the world beyond his wealth. As they walked slowly among the flowers, she began to talk, not about riches or duties, but about simple things, the rhythm of seasons, the way sunlight warms the skin, the stories behind the flowers in the garden. She shared memories from her own life, ordinary experiences that carried weight because of the sincerity in her voice. The Sheik, who had long abandoned conversation that was not about business or strategy, found himself listening. He even asked a question or two, quietly, almost cautiously, testing whether the connection was real. It was not immediate, but change is rarely sudden. Over the weeks, small cracks appeared in the walls he had built around himself. He started to allow brief smiles, to acknowledge the presence of another human being without suspicion. He began to take walks with her in the garden, sometimes silent, sometimes speaking about trivial things, but always noticing life outside the palace walls. He began to remember what it felt like to simply exist, to breathe, to feel the wind, to hear the laughter of birds. These small experiences, once unnoticed, became moments of life that reached deep into his heart. one day. As they sat beneath a tall, blossoming tree, she noticed his gaze lingering on a bird perched on a branch. "Do you remember when you were a child, watching birds in the sky?" she asked softly. He paused, surprised that she could even imagine such a thing. Slowly, a memory surfaced, the feeling of sitting outside as a boy, watching the world, dreaming of possibilities. The sheik felt a warmth he had not felt in decades. He nodded, almost ashamed, realizing how long it had been since he had allowed himself to remember joy. The caregiver's presence began to touch more than just his days. It reached into his nights as well. He found himself sleeping a little better, waking without the weight of despair pressing on his chest. She reminded him to eat, to drink, to move, and in these simple acts of care, he began to trust that someone could be there for him without asking for anything in return. This trust was fragile yet precious, a small seed planted in barren soil. Despite his progress, he was still wary. Years of power, betrayal, and isolation had left him cautious. He did not open his heart easily. There were moments of frustration, moments when old habits returned, when he would snap or retreat. Yet she did not withdraw. She met each of his reactions with patience, not anger or judgment. She learned when to speak and when to stay silent, when to push, and when to let time work its quiet magic. Slowly, he began to see that her care was not a burden, but a gift, one that could not be bought, measured, or sold. One rainy afternoon, as water drummed softly against the palace windows, the sheik found himself speaking more freely than he had in years. He spoke of regrets, mistakes, and the loneliness that had consumed him. The caregiver listened quietly, not offering solutions or platitudes, but simply hearing him. The act of being listened to, of being truly seen without judgment, was something he had almost forgotten existed. And in that moment, he realized how starved he had been for simple human connection. Over time, he started engaging in small acts of kindness. Encouraged by her example, he reached out to staff he had ignored, asked questions about their lives, and even showed interest in their families. It was awkward at first, almost clumsy, but each gesture brought him closer to a sense of life he had lost. The staff noticed, amazed at the shift. The sheik, once distant and cold, was beginning to care in ways they had never seen, and each small act of engagement began to chip away at the despair that had once felt permanent. She did not just care for his body or his schedule, she cared for his spirit. She reminded him of the simple joys in life, a cup of tea on a quiet morning, the sound of laughter, the smell of earth after rain. She encouraged him to reflect, not on wealth or power, but on life itself. She helped him see that even in sorrow there could be beauty, that even in despair there could be hope. And slowly, the sheik began to remember the man he had been before the world's cruelty had hardened him. One evening, as the sun set in a riot of colors over the desert, he found himself talking about dreams he had long abandoned. Dreams not of wealth, but of living a life that mattered. He spoke quietly, almost to himself, about wanting to leave something behind that was more than gold and jewels. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of purpose, a fragile but undeniable hope. The caregiver, sitting quietly beside him, simply smiled, knowing that the hardest part had already begun awakening. A heart that had been asleep for far too long, days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The sheik continued to change in small, almost imperceptible ways. He laughed softly at jokes, shared stories from his past, and even began planning small outings beyond the palace walls. The caregiver remained by his side, a constant, gentle presence, guiding him with patience and wisdom. He began to see that life was not about gold, not about power, not about titles. It was about connection, about caring, about being present. And in this realization, he found a flicker of light, a reason to begin living again. One morning, she suggested they visit a nearby village. At first he resisted, thinking of the complexities, the arrangements, the potential discomfort. But something within him, stirred by her persistence and kindness, agreed. As they walked among the people, he saw faces that smiled freely. Children playing without care, families sharing meals and laughter. It was a world so different from the palace, yet it awakened a deep longing he had buried for decades. He felt alive, truly alive, in a way he had not known existed. The villagers did not know who he was, and perhaps that was why it mattered even more. No one admired him for his wealth or feared him for his power. He was just a man among others, a human being capable of kindness and empathy. He spoke with them, listened to their stories, and even helped in small, meaningful ways. For the first time in decades, he understood what it meant to connect, to be part of life beyond his palace walls. By the time they returned home, the sheik felt different. Lighter, somehow, as though a heavy cloak had been removed from his shoulders. He realized that the caregiver had given him more than companionship, or Kershi had given him a reason to hope. She had shown him that life could still have meaning, even after loss, despair, and betrayal. And in that realization, he began to see that perhaps he could live again. Not for wealth or power, but for the simple, profound joy of being human. Life inside the palace began to change in ways the sheik had not expected. It was not the gold or the luxury that made a difference, but the simple, quiet presence of someone who cared. Day by day, he felt a little more alive, a little less trapped by the emptiness that had dominated his heart for so long. The caregiver had become more than a helper. She had become a companion, someone who understood him without words, someone whose patience allowed him to rediscover feelings he thought were gone forever. He began to notice the little things again. The way sunlight streamed through the windows in the morning, warming the floors and walls. The scent of fresh bread from the palace kitchen carried on the breeze. The sound of laughter from staff who had once seemed like distant shadows. These small details, once invisible to him, now reached into his heart and reminded him that life could still hold beauty. One afternoon, she suggested that they go outside the palace gates. At first, he hesitated. The world beyond his walls had always been distant, foreign, even dangerous in his mind. But she insisted, not with commands, but with a quiet encouragement that made him feel safe. He agreed slowly, cautiously, and they stepped into the sunlight together. The streets of the nearby town were alive with ordinary people, going about their daily lives. He watched a baker knead dough, a group of children chase each other through the narrow alleys, a woman selling flowers with a smile. The simplicity of it was overwhelming. For the first time in decades, he felt a part of something real. As they walked, she encouraged him to speak with people, to ask about their lives, their families, their dreams. At first, he was hesitant, unsure of what to say or how to connect. But the people were kind, responding with honesty and warmth rather than fear or reverence. He felt something he had not felt in years, being seen as a person, not a title, not a source of wealth or power. With each conversation, he felt a small spark of life returning, a reminder that human connection could heal wounds that money never could. One evening, after returning to the palace, he sat alone in his study. The walls, once oppressive, now felt like a place where he could think, reflect, and remember. He took out an old journal he had not touched in years. Pages filled with hopes, dreams, and thoughts he had written as a younger man stared back at him. Reading them brought both pain and comfort. He realized how much he had changed, how far he had drifted from the person he once hoped to become. But he also saw that the spark of life he once had could still exist. It just needed attention, care, and courage to reignite. The caregiver noticed the change in him. She did not push or demand, but her gentle guidance helped him take small steps. He began to open up about the regrets that had haunted him, speaking in soft, hesitant words about the mistakes he had made, the people he had hurt, the opportunities he had lost. She listened, without judgment, without interruption, simply allowing him to speak and be heard. In that act of listening, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a burden he had carried alone for far too long. He also began to share small pieces of his past. Stories of his childhood, the joys he had known before ambition and wealth had consumed him. He spoke of his parents, their teachings, the love he had once felt, and the dreams he had held. These stories were fragile, vulnerable. Yet telling them aloud reminded him that he still had a voice, that his experiences still mattered, and that he could find meaning beyond the life of luxury and isolation he had. The caregiver introduced him to simple activities that encouraged creativity and presence. They planted flowers in the garden together, watched sunsets, and even attempted painting. At first, he laughed at his own attempts, feeling awkward and out of practice. But each small act became a form of healing. Creating something with his own hands, sharing in laughter, and witnessing beauty unfold reminded him that life could be playful, tender, and alive again. One day, she suggested a small trip to a nearby village to help with a community project. He hesitated, thinking of the logistics, the discomforts, the people. Yet something within him, a feeling he could not name, encouraged him to agree. When they arrived, he saw people working together, smiling and helping one another. Children ran past him, laughing, while elders shared stories and wisdom. He felt a strange mix of humility and joy. He realized that this world, ordinary and simple, held a richness he had never experienced in palaces or private jets. He joined in small ways, helping to organize materials, offering encouragement, and even sharing small skills he had learned in business. The villagers did not know who he was, nor did they treat him differently. For the first time, he experienced equality, not wealth, power, or title, just human connection. He realized that giving of himself, in ways that mattered to others, brought a kind of satisfaction that money could never buy. This was a new feeling, one that began to take root in his heart, slowly transforming the man who had been trapped in despair at night. As they returned to the palace, he felt exhausted, but alive in a way he had not felt in decades. His body carried the weariness of activity, but his heart felt lighter, as if the heavy chains of isolation were beginning to loosen. He reflected on the day and the simple joy of participating, connecting, and being useful beyond himself. He realized that he could find purpose not in gold, but in connection, compassion, and action. The caregiver's role in his life became even clearer. She was not there to entertain, to obey, or to serve. She was there to remind him of his own humanity, to encourage him to reconnect with the world, and to show him that life was still worth living. He began to rely on her presence, not in a dependent way, but in a way that grounded him. He looked forward to the days she spent with him, not out of obligation, but because they brought light to the darkness he had carried for so long. Slowly, he began to think about the future differently. Before, the future had felt like an endless expanse of meaningless days. Now, he could imagine using his wealth, influence, and energy in ways that mattered. He started making small plans, not grandiose schemes, not displays of power, but meaningful actions that could help people, communities, and perhaps even himself. This was a new way of thinking, one that brought both hope and responsibility, a feeling he had long thought impossible. He also began to mend relationships that had been neglected or broken. He reached out to old friends, offering apologies where needed, and listening with openness rather than pride. He connected with distant family members, learning about their lives and sharing his own experiences in ways he never had before. These steps were tentative, often uncomfortable, but they reminded him that it was never too late to rebuild, to care, and to participate in the lives of others. As the days passed, he noticed a shift in himself. He laughed more easily, smiled without thinking, and even felt excitement at small possibilities. He realized that despair had not been permanent, had only been a phase, a heavy cloud that had hidden the sun. And now, with patient guidance and gentle encouragement, that cloud was beginning to break, revealing light he thought he had lost forever. One evening, as they watched the sunset together, the sheik turned to her and spoke softly, almost as if afraid to give voice to his feelings. "I had forgotten what it means to feel alive," he said. She smiled gently, saying nothing, letting the words stand. He continued, "I don't know how it happened, but being here, seeing life, helping others, talking with you, it feels like I am remembering myself." Her presence, steady and calm, had helped him reach a place he thought was unreachable, the recognition that he could live again, not as a distant figure of power, but as a man connected to the world around him. This realization marked a turning point. The sheik no longer merely existed within the walls of the palace, He engaged with life, sought understanding, and looked for meaning in moments rather than possessions. He understood that wealth and power could not replace human connection, nor could they heal a lonely heart. What mattered now was presence, empathy, and the willingness to open himself to the world once more. He began to plan small acts of generosity, using his resources not to show off or to gain respect, but to create opportunities for others, to support communities, and to bring comfort where it was needed. Every action reminded him that life was not just about survival, about avoiding despair, but about contributing, caring, and connecting. Each small success, each smile he received, strengthened his belief that he could have a purpose beyond his title. Through it all, the caregiver remained by his side, a quiet guide who never demanded, judged, or rushed him. She showed him that hope was not a sudden miracle, but a process, a slow awakening that required patience, trust, and courage. She reminded him that life could be gentle, kind, and fulfilling if he allowed himself to participate fully, rather than hide behind walls of fear and sorrow. By the end of this period, the Sheik had begun to transform. He laughed freely, engaged with people around him, and found joy in small, ordinary things. He had taken the first true steps toward reclaiming his life, discovering that purpose was not given, it was found, nurtured, and embraced. And while he knew the journey was far from over, I had finally begun to see a path forward, one that promised hope, meaning, and a chance to truly live once again. Life inside the palace began to feel different. The Sheik no longer moved like a shadow drifting through rooms of gold and silence. He walked with purpose, his steps lighter, his eyes brighter. Each day brought a sense of possibility he had not felt in years. The small moments of connection with the caregiver had transformed into a deeper understanding of himself and the world. He began to see life not as a burden, but as an opportunity, a chance to give, to care, and to make a difference. He started with the staff, the people who had worked for him quietly for years. Before, he had taken them for granted, seeing only their service to him, not their humanity. Now, he listened to their stories, asked about their families, and noticed their efforts. A smile, a word of thanks, a simple acknowledgement, it seemed so small, yet it carried a power he had never understood. For the first time, he realized that kindness could be as valuable as wealth, and that respect, given freely, could change lives, including his own. One morning, he gathered the palace staff in the main hall. But because he had touched their lives in meaningful ways, he visited the school he had supported, watching the students read and write, their faces full of hope and curiosity. It filled him with a quiet pride and a sense of responsibility. He realized that his actions, however small, had the power to create ripples of change far beyond what he could see. The caregiver, now a trusted friend and guide, walked beside him. She had never sought recognition for the changes she had inspired, but her presence remained constant, grounding him in ways he could not have achieved alone. She had taught him patience, humility, and the value of listening. She had reminded him that life's greatest gifts are often invisible: the warmth of a smile, the comfort of a kind word, the quiet understanding of another human being. Together, they moved through the village, sharing in the lives of people who had once seemed distant or unreachable. The Sheik had also begun to reconcile with his past. He reached out to old friends, offering apologies and seeking forgiveness for mistakes he had made. Some relationships were mended, others remained fragile, but he accepted each outcome with grace. He realized that forgiveness was not about erasing the past, but about freeing oneself to live fully in the present. By letting go of bitterness and regret, he felt lighter, more open, ready to embrace the possibilities ahead. In the palace, life had taken on a rhythm of purpose. He met regularly with his staff to discuss not only business matters, but ways to improve the lives of the people who depended on him. He invested in projects that created opportunities for communities, funded schools, and provided healthcare for those in need. His wealth, once a symbol of isolation and emptiness, had become a tool for positive change. Each success, each life touched, reinforced his belief that true legacy is measured not by possessions, but by the good one brings into the world. The sheik also began mentoring young people, sharing his experiences and the lessons he had learned. He spoke to them about ambition, responsibility, and kindness. He told them that wealth and power are meaningless without empathy, that true strength lies in lifting others rather than oneself. Watching the young people dream, strive, and grow filled him with a sense of fulfillment he had never known. For the first time, he understood the profound joy of nurturing hope in others, and he realized that this was a gift far greater than anything he could buy, even in quiet moments. He felt the transformation within himself. He walked through his gardens, watched the birds, and listened to the wind with a sense of wonder and gratitude. Simple pleasures once overlooked or ignored now held deep meaning. A cup of tea shared with the caregiver became a moment of reflection and connection. A conversation with a staff member became a lesson in humility and understanding. The sheik had learned to appreciate life not for its grandeur, but for its simplicity, its beauty, and its potential to heal and inspire. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues over the desert, the sheik reflected on his journey. He thought of the days when despair had ruled his heart, when he had felt trapped and hopeless despite his wealth. He remembered the loneliness, the bitterness, and the fear that life would never hold meaning again. And yet, here he was, standing at the threshold of a life full of purpose, connection, and joy. He realized that every struggle, every loss, and every moment of doubt had led him to this point. Without those experiences, he might never have discovered the strength and depth within himself. The caregiver had been a guiding light, but the transformation was ultimately his own. He had chosen to embrace life, to open his heart, and to see the world not as a place of power and isolation, but as a space of connection, growth, and hope. He had learned that true change comes from within, and that the presence of someone who believes in you can awaken a courage and clarity that seemed lost forever. In the weeks that followed, the sheik continued to expand his efforts to make a positive impact. He funded more community projects, supported local businesses, and helped establish programs for education and healthcare. He worked alongside his staff and the people he helped, not as a distant ruler, but as a partner and mentor. His days were filled with purpose, his nights with reflection and gratitude. He had discovered that life's greatest rewards come not from what one possesses, but from what one gives. He also embraced a new sense of joy in personal relationships. He spent time with family members, reconnecting and healing old wounds. He nurtured friendships that had been neglected, offering support, understanding, and care. And through it all, he maintained a deep bond with the caregiver. His presence had been instrumental in guiding him from despair to hope. Their connection was one of mutual respect, trust, and quiet understanding, a reminder that true companionship is built on care and consistency rather than obligation or convenience. The sheik began to see the world differently. He noticed the small acts of kindness that people often overlooked. A neighbor helping another with chores, a teacher patiently guiding a child, a family sharing a meal together. These moments, simple yet profound, reminded him that life is full of meaning if one takes the time to notice, appreciate, and participate. He had learned to slow down, to observe, and to engage fully in the present, rather than being consumed by worry, ambition, or regret. He also reflected on the lessons he had learned about humility and gratitude. He understood that wealth is a responsibility, not a privilege, and that influence is most powerful when used to lift others rather than oneself. He recognized the fragility of life and the importance of nurturing relationships, both old and new. And most importantly, he realized that hope, once nurtured, can grow into a force strong enough to change not only one's own life, but the lives of many. One afternoon, he walked through the palace gardens with the caregiver. The flowers they had planted together were in full bloom, a symbol of growth, care, and patience. Birds flitted among the branches, and the warm sunlight seemed to touch everything with a sense of possibility. He paused to watch a butterfly land gently on a flower, marveling at its fragility and grace. "Life feels alive again," he said softly, almost to himself. "I never imagined I could feel this way," she smiled, saying nothing, letting him absorb the truth of his words. The sheik's transformation was also evident to those around him. Staff members noticed his attentiveness, compassion, and willingness to engage. Villagers spoke of his kindness, generosity, and respect. Young people he mentored carried with them lessons that would influence their lives for years to come. He had become a man whose presence brought hope, whose actions inspired others, and whose heart had been awakened to the beauty and responsibility of life. Even his personal reflections became richer and more meaningful. He kept a journal, writing about his experiences, his observations, and the lessons he learned each day. He noted moments of joy, acts of kindness, and the small miracles of everyday life. Writing became a way to understand himself, process his emotions, and celebrate the progress he had made. Each entry reinforced his sense of purpose and reminded him of the journey from despair to hope. The Sheik also embraced the uncertainty of life. Understanding that not everything could be controlled or predicted, he accepted that challenges would come, that setbacks were inevitable, and that growth often involves struggle. But he faced these challenges with a new strength, knowing that hope, connection, and purpose were his guiding lights. He no longer feared the future, because he understood that life's meaning comes from how one chooses to live each moment, rather than from what one possesses or achieves. In the quiet moments of reflection, he thought about the caregiver and the role she had played in his life. She had entered his world without expectation, offering care, patience, and understanding. She had helped him see that life could be meaningful again, and that even the darkest despair can be transformed with trust, support, and perseverance. He realized that true change often comes from the presence of someone who believes in you, even when you cannot believe in yourself. The Sheik had finally embraced a life of balance. He continued to manage his wealth and responsibilities, but no longer allowed them to define him. He invested in communities, nurtured relationships, and cultivated inner growth. He found joy in simple pleasures, purpose in meaningful work, and connection in everyday interactions. He had learned that the greatest treasures are not gold or jewels, but the lives one touches, the kindness one gives, and the hope one fosters as the sun set on another day. The Sheik stood in the palace gardens, watching the sky turn from gold to deep purple. He thought of the journey he had taken from despair and loneliness to hope and purpose. He reflected on the lessons learned, the lives changed, and the heart awakened. He realized that life, in all its complexity and beauty, is worth living fully, courageously, and with an open heart. The Sheik smiled, feeling a sense of peace he had never known. He had been lost, broken, and hopeless, but through patience, care, and human connection, he had found a reason to live. His life was no longer defined by wealth or power, but by meaning, compassion, and the impact he could make on the world. And in that realization, he knew he had truly arrived, not at the end of his journey, but at the beginning of a life fully lived.